the likelihood that the risks will occur and the impact they would have if they do. An easy approach is to rate probability as likely, somewhat likely, and unlikely, and impact as large, medium, or small. For example, with the sample project, suppose a construction delay is very likely, and it would have a large impact because it pushes the finish date out. For every likely and serious risk, you plan ahead for how you would handle that risk if it occurs. You might also develop plans to handle risks with medium impact and somewhat likely probability. Next, you need to come up with a plan for reducing risk. For each risk you decide to manage, you can look for ways to reduce its probability, its impact, or both. In the sample project, construction delay is both likely and significant. You might add a penalty clause for delays into your contract to reduce the likelihood of delay. You could use contingency time in your schedule so a delay wouldn't have as large an impact. Add these risk reduction plans to your risk plan spreadsheet. Once the project is underway, be sure to keep your risk plan up to date. For example, the probability decreases with time for some risk, while it increases for others. Changes in the project can affect probability and impact. New risks might arise. If a risk occurs, include status on the risk. Is your action plan working? What are your next steps? Using one of your projects, identify the risks that could occur, rate their probability and impact, and develop plans for managing them. Your project schedule is usually based on the time estimates you deem most likely to occur. But you know projects usually don't go completely according to plan, so it's a good idea to add a bit of buffer to your schedule. Just like you'd leave your house early if you have to drive to a doctor's appointment during rush hour. If you're smart, you asked people for more than one estimate for their tasks. The most likely time, the time it would take if things go wrong, and the time it would take if everything goes perfectly. You know you don't want to use the optimistic estimates because the risk of delivering late is huge. However, the pessimistic estimates make the schedule so long that the customer would be scared of doing the project at all. The good news is that those three estimates come in handy for figuring out how much of a buffer to add to your project. Let's use the office project to see how this works. Say that your most likely schedule has a duration of 8 weeks, and the worst case schedule is 12 weeks. Maybe the best case schedule is 4 weeks. In reality, the project could finish in any duration between the best and worst case. The graph of probability for the project duration looks like this, and that means you have a 50-50 chance of delivering the project on the most likely finish date. That's way too risky. Suppose you want a 90% chance of delivering on the date you give the customer. Without going into the geeky statistical details, it turns out that with a normal distribution like this one, 90% probability of success is halfway between the most likely and worst case duration. That is 10 weeks. So what do? We add a 2-week buffer to the end of the project to take it from 8 weeks to 10 weeks. In our example, that makes the new finish date May 14th. As it turns out, we're lucky because that's when the business owner wants the project to finish. On the other hand, if finishing late comes with a big penalty, choose a buffer that gets you closer to the worst case. Once the project is underway, if issues arise, you can cut into the buffer without endangering the finish date you promised. The last step in project planning is to get approval for the plan you put together. It's important to review the plan with the customer and other stakeholders. That way, you can present alternatives and give them a chance to ask questions. At the meeting, walk through the plan. Explain the decisions and assumptions you made. Point out any details that you think could be sticking points. For example, in the office project, you might tell Beth, the cost is higher than you want, but it's the only way to get everything you need in the office and the IT systems. If you put together alternatives, describe the trade-offs between them, such as what Beth would have to give up to stay within her budget. After the review, it's time to get the plan approval in writing. Typically, you send an email to the customer after the meeting asking for approval and get an email back with their commitment. Don't be surprised if a customer asks you to start working before you get formal approval. The reasons and excuses may vary, but your answer should always be, "Sorry, I can't do that." You can reassure the customer that the review won't take long, but don't cave in. If you start work before the customer reviews the plan, it's almost certain that you'll have to backtrack and work in the changes that come up. Once the plan is approved, you're ready to work on delivering project results. Now that the plan is approved, you can kick off the real work for the project and start showing progress on what the customer really wants. For many projects, one of the first things that has to happen is signing contracts. If you're a freelancer, you might have approval for the proposal you submitted, but it's wise to hold off on starting work until the legal papers are signed. Next, it's a good idea to hold a kickoff meeting or a conference call. This event can perform several functions. First, a kickoff is the perfect time to make sure everyone understands the project and gets jazzed about it. The ideal is to have the customer talk about the goal and why it's important. Second, the kickoff can start team building. Team members can meet and learn a little bit about each other, if they don't already. To help people get to know one another, ask them to share a personal tidbit, like a hobby or anecdote. Each person might talk about what they do and their role in the project. Third, you can walk through the project plan, what's involved, when it's due, and any constraints. Now is a good time to run through processes or procedures you want people to follow. It's always a good idea to ask if anyone has questions. In addition to answering the questions that come up at the meeting, create a list of questions and answers after the meeting and post them where everyone can find them. Everyone has their own style with kickoff meetings, so come up with your ideal agenda and what you would do to make it as effective as possible. Once the project is launched, you're like the conductor of an orchestra. You get team members working on their assignments, make sure they know what to do, and keep them on time. Send team members the complete information about the tasks that are on deck and ready to go, when the tasks start, the estimated hours, and when they're supposed to finish. If you have a document that describes the work, send that too, or at least where they can go to get more info. Particularly with a smaller team, people may already know what they're supposed to work on. They might have helped you identify the work and estimate it. For those team members, you might follow up with a quick, "Are you good?" They say, "I'm good," and they go get started. With less experienced people, it's a good idea to review their assignments with them to make sure they understand what they're supposed to do. See if they have any questions about their assignments. That can help uncover misunderstandings. If your project is a little larger, team leads might head up groups of people. In this case, you hand off assignments to your team leads and let them take care of communicating with their team. Most people want to know what's coming down the road. In addition to giving people the go-ahead on their current assignments, remind them what's coming up and approximately when that's going to start. Over the life of the project, you'll be handing out assignments. Use these methods for every handoff so that your team members know what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. As the project manager, you can do several things to help the project proceed smoothly. First, think of yourself as working for your team members rather than the other way around. If they need something to get their work done, try to get it for them. Be ready to help them if they run into roadblocks. If someone is holding up their work, convince that person to deliver. If the processes you set up for the project take too much time or don't work in some way, fix them. If team members have questions about their work, get the answer for them. And if they have suggestions, listen to what they have to say and take action if it makes sense. Second, a good system of organization helps keep things moving. Projects typically have a lot going on, so it's easy to forget things or get overwhelmed. You need to know when it's time to perform your recurring project management tasks, like scheduling status meetings, preparing project reports, and communicating. But every day, small to-dos pop up. You need a way to track them and make sure they get done when they're needed. Add a priority and due date to each item. That way, you can work on the highest priorities and closest deadlines first and make informed decisions about what to do next. An electronic tool is better than paper because you can mark things as complete or edit entries when the situation changes. What's most important is that the system works for you. Experiment with different approaches and choose the one you prefer. Your email or calendar program can remind you about to-dos that are coming up. A to-do list application for your computer or smartphone might offer more, but might mean buying another program. A task list in a collaboration tool lets you share your list with others easily. But if you like working with paper, that's fine too. In addition to staying on top of your own to-dos, remind team members about due dates, deadlines, and deliverables. If some team members have trouble staying on top of their work, coach them on how to keep track. Micromanaging, on the other hand, is a big no-no. Provide guidance to inexperienced team members and let them know it's okay to ask questions, but give them room to figure out some things on their own. If something goes wrong, don't jump to blaming or criticizing. Explain the problem and discuss ways to avoid it in the future. Reiterate what you want going forward. At the same time, acknowledge and praise people when they're doing things right. It takes practice to keep things moving on projects. Use the tips in this movie to keep your project on the move. Solving problems and making decisions is just another day at the office for project managers. The ability to focus on what's most important is a valuable skill to add to your skills toolbox. People sometimes confuse urgency with importance. A ringing phone is urgent, but the call might not be important. Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, uses a graph that categorizes the things that compete for your attention by importance and urgency. Because the items in each quadrant of the graph require a different approach, start by gauging both the importance and urgency of each problem and decision you face. First, determine whether the item is important. To assess importance, you can ask 2 questions. Does this decision or problem have a significant impact? Does the impact last for a long time? If the impact is significant and lasts a long time, the item is very important. Suppose you choose an office space that doesn't satisfy the company's needs. That decision hurts the business for several years until the lease is up, so it's really important. On the other hand, what color to paint the walls isn't that important, and repainting is relatively easy. Second, you need to know when you have to act. If you're looking for office space in a tight real estate market, you need to make your decision quickly. If the problem or decision is important but not urgent, grab your calendar and schedule a time to work on it. For example, you have to line up movers a few weeks before the construction is done, so you add that to your calendar. That way, you'll make time for important items that don't clamor to get done, like planning or skills development. Urgent but unimportant items don't simply disappear. If someone comes to your office with an unimportant issue, like what to order for lunch for the team requirements meeting, you might delegate it to someone else. Unimportant and non-urgent items are the easiest. For example, when unimportant items are waiting in your email inbox, you might reply to the sender with a suggestion to ask someone. Or you might simply disregard an item like an unsolicited proposal for web services. To solve problems, take the time to understand what the problem is. Look beyond the symptoms to uncover the underlying disease. When someone says, "This doesn't work," how do you know where to start? Find out why people think there's a problem and what they think is causing it. Ask questions like, what are you trying to do? What were you expecting? And what happened instead? The next step is to identify and evaluate your options. List options and identify their pros and cons so you can weigh the overall benefits of each one. Keep in mind, doing nothing is an option and can be a reasonable alternative. Solving problems and making decisions takes practice. Apply these techniques whenever problems arise until the steps become second nature. As team members work on their assignments, you need to find out what they get done and what's still left to do. Updates tell you where the project stands and whether you need to do anything to get it back on track. 2 measures almost always top the list. Most customers have a finish date in mind, like opening the new office before the lease on the old one is up. Cost is the other given. For freelancers, contracts could have a not to exceed amount. You either have to finish your work within the allotted number of hours or get approval for more time. In a large organization, you might have a corporate budget to stick to. You can keep people focused on their assignments by making the update process as easy as possible. Ask for only the information you really need. Use a simple form for your team members to fill out and send to you. Whatever is easiest, an email or a spreadsheet, for example. If your team is really small, you might get all the info you need at a team meeting. The level of detail depends on the project. First, find out when people start working on their tasks. Second, ask how much progress they've made. Third, ask when they think they will finish. That way, you'll know when in-progress tasks should finish and when on-deck tasks can start. If your team members are employees and you don't need to account for their hours, you can stop there. If your project pays people by time worked, you need to know how many hours team members have worked so far, so you can track the money that's been spent. You also need the estimated hours remaining and the estimated finish date. For example, Sally started testing the internet service on April 16th and has 12 hours completed as of April 20th. She estimates she needs another 8 hours and will finish on April 25th, a few days later than scheduled. You will have to check the schedule to see if that delay affects other tasks. You might also check whether the extra hours affect your budget. When you start a project, see whether there are tools for getting the information you need already available in your organization. If not, identify an easy way to get data from your team members. If the team is very small, discuss what you need and find out how they would like to submit data. Once work is underway, you compare the progress that's being made to what you had planned. That way, you can see whether any corrections are in order. First, look at the schedule. Have any tasks finished later than planned? In the sample project, the construction permit took a week longer than planned, which delayed the build-out and the hardware and software installations. Second, are any tasks taking longer than planned? Perhaps people working on tasks don't have enough experience. Your estimates might be too low, or your team members don't have the right tools, or are held back by obstacles. Ask team members what the problem is. That way, you'll be able to decide the best way to respond. Next, look at cost. Cost issues can arise if labor or material costs are higher than expected. Cost can also increase if tasks take more hours to complete. For example, in the sample project, the software cost $7,000 instead of $5,000. The owner approved that change request, but hopes to cut some of the remaining cost to make up for that increase. Projects can go off track in many ways. Once you see where things stand and what issues have come up, you'll be able to choose the best way to get your project back on track. What if your project is behind schedule or over budget? If you included contingency time and money, you might not have to do anything. But if things are really bad, you'll have to find ways to get your project back on track. In our sample project, we added a 2-week buffer at the end of the project. The construction permit took a week longer than planned, so we can simply take that week away from the buffer. And there's 5 days of buffer left. Let's say that the software cost a bit more than planned. If you have money set aside for situations like this, you use some of those contingency funds to cover the overrun. You might be tempted to hope that things get better. Maybe you're afraid you'll lose your job or you won't get more work from this customer. First, face facts. Projects don't correct course on their own. You need to take action. Second, your customer will be much more unhappy if you wait until the last minute to admit something is wrong. Instead, come up with a plan for getting the project back on track. Then discuss the plan with your customer and make changes to the remaining work based on the customer's feedback. If you need to shorten the schedule, critical tasks are the place to start because they're the ones that directly affect the project finish. In addition, start with the longest tasks on the critical path. You can gain more time by shortening longer tasks so you don't have to shorten as many. In our sample project, the longest tasks are obtaining the construction permit, building out the office space, and testing the internet service. Let's look at ways to shorten the schedule or cut cost. Remember the triple constraint of time, cost, and scope? The solution to your dilemma is in rebalancing these three aspects of your project. For example, you could shorten the schedule by increasing the cost or by reducing the scope. Or, if the budget is maxed out, you might lengthen the schedule or reduce scope. One option for shortening the schedule is to overlap tasks. Instead of starting a task after its predecessor finishes, you start the task while the predecessor is underway. For example, you could start the office build-out before you get the construction permit. Although you don't have to spend more or cut scope, there is some risk with this approach. The second option for shortening the schedule is to pay more. For example, maybe you could pay a higher fee to get the construction permit more quickly, so it takes the 2 weeks you planned. You might assign more people to a task to finish it more quickly. For example, someone could help Sally test the internet service to finish testing in 3 days instead of 6. At some point, too many people working on the same task can make it take longer as they communicate more, disagree, or get in each other's way. You might assign someone more experienced and more costly to get tasks done in less time. Or you could pay overtime to finish tasks earlier, like the construction team working on the build-out. The third option for shortening the schedule is to reduce scope. For example, in a software project, you could eliminate less important features. It's important to get the customer's buy-in when reducing scope because the project might not achieve all the original objectives. If budget is more important than time, you can
music down because my child's sleeping and I can hear your bass in my house. Thanks.
Yeah, one more, dummy.
Maybe you shouldn't be on the phone pouty and rude and ignorant. Excuse me? Go ahead, fucking job.
اللي بتأثر تنورة ليه بتأثر تنورة تلحقها عيون الشباب هي بحالها مغرورة هي بحالها مغرورة ليه بتأثر تنورة ليه بتأثر
Ako'y tahimik lang sa umpisa. Kahit di mo ko pinitin. Malasing
You can't shoot me, I'm not black enough!